Most killers take their secrets to the grave, but some cannot. Something breaks in those final hours.
I sexually interfered with it, and she would say no.
When a lifetime of silence cracked open in a hospital room, or a single trembling letter left behind, and suddenly, a case that was cold for 30 years is solved overnight. These are 20 real deathbed confessions where the mysteries were finally solved. Fritz Moen. Fritz Moen, a deaf, partially blind man in Norway who spent 18 years in prison for 2 murders he did not commit. He was convicted largely because investigators refused to seriously consider the possibility that a disabled man could be innocent, and because his sign language interpreter made critical errors during police questioning that transformed his answers into something unrecognizable. He maintained his innocence for every one of those 18 years. Nobody believed him. He was released in 1995 after serving his sentence, still carrying the conviction. In December 2005, a convicted felon named Tor Hepso was dying in hospital. He called 3 nurses to his bedside separately and one by one confessed to murdering both women, Sigrid Hegheim and Torunn Finstad, the exact 2 killings for which Fritz had spent 18 years imprisoned. A full investigation was immediately launched. Hepso's guilt was confirmed beyond any doubt. Fritz Moen was officially exonerated, but Fritz Moen had died of natural causes just months before the exoneration was completed. Nobody was able to reach him with the news. He died in Norway as a convicted double murderer because the real killer's confession arrived just a few months too late. Larry Webb. For 24 years, Rick Lafferty searched for his daughter. Alex was 10 years old when she disappeared from Beckley, West Virginia in August 2000. Along with her mother, Susan Carter, there were no witnesses. In 2022, an elderly man named Larry Webb, by then living in a nursing facility, contacted police and told them the truth he had been carrying for over 2 decades. He had shot Susan over money he believed she had stolen from him. He had then turned and shot Alex because she had seen it happen. He wrapped both bodies, stored them in his basement while he dug, then buried them in the backyard of the house, the very house where they had been living. When investigators searched the property, they found a bullet still embedded in the wall of Alex's bedroom. The blood on that bullet matched Alex. Webb was indicted for murder in 2023, arrested in 2024, and died shortly after, before the case ever reached trial. The bodies were recovered exactly where he said they would be. Hannah Quick. On the night of February 7, 1980, a fire ripped through a Brooklyn townhouse and killed a mother and her 5 young children. The landlady, Hannah Quick, told police she had watched 3 men flee the building moments before the flames appeared. She named them William Vasquez, Amori Villalobos, Raymond Mora. All 3 maintained their innocence at every stage. All 3 were sentenced to 25 years to life. Raymond Mora died of a heart attack inside that prison in 1989, never knowing the day would come when he would be cleared. William Vasquez developed glaucoma behind bars. He lost his sight entirely. He and Villalobos were finally released on parole in 2012, old men, after more than 30 years inside. 2 years later, Hannah Quick was on her deathbed. She told her daughter that she had fabricated everything. She had never seen 3 men fleeing. She had invented them to protect herself from blame. She was the one responsible for the dangerous electrical conditions that had likely caused the fire. She confessed in 2014. All 3 men were officially exonerated in 2015. Harvey Richardson. The decorators found it on top of the wardrobe, a brown leather satchel, sealed shut, marked private and confidential in careful handwriting. Harvey Richardson had died alone in a Wigan hospice in 2008 from bowel cancer. He had no criminal record. He was, by every account, a quiet and entirely unremarkable man. Inside that satchel, workers found a 9-page handwritten confession. Richardson described how in September 1970, drunk after failing his librarian examinations, he had followed 19-year-old Lorraine Jacob into a Liverpool alleyway. and strangled her. Lorraine had been found the following morning, still clutching the chips she had bought the night before. Over 100 officers had worked her case across the following decades. No suspect had ever been identified, but Richardson had been watching every development from a distance, because also inside that sealed satchel, 38 years of newspaper clippings about the murder, every anniversary report he had collected and kept, and Lorraine's missing underwear, preserved alongside his written confession for nearly 4 decades. DNA confirmed everything. The case was officially closed in 2009. Ted Conrad. He walked out of Society National Bank in Cleveland, Ohio on a Friday afternoon in 1969 with $215,000 in a paper bag and never looked back. The heist barely made the news. Apollo 11 had just landed on the moon, and nobody had space for a bank robbery. Ted Conrad effectively ceased to exist. In his place appeared Thomas Randell of suburban Boston, a married man, a country club golf professional, a luxury car salesman described by everyone who knew him as warm, gentle, and deeply beloved. He lived that life for 52 years. He became close friends with a local FBI agent who had no idea. U.S. Marshals hunted Ted Conrad the entire time. In March 2021, dying of lung cancer, Thomas Randall sat down with his daughter during his first chemotherapy session and told her who he actually was.
And that's when he told me that his name was Ted Conrad.
She went home alone that night, typed his real name into a search engine, and found hundreds of articles about a wanted fugitive, her father. He died 2 months later. The U.S. Marshals identified him from details in his published obituary. He had named himself Thomas, after the lead character in his favorite film, The Thomas Crown Affair, about a man who robs a bank and gets away with it. Moira Anderson. On a cold February morning in 1957, the 11-year-old Moira Anderson stepped onto a bus in Coatbridge, Scotland, on an errand for her grandmother. She was never seen again. The bus driver that day was Alexander Gartshaw, a man who would later be convicted of unrelated sexual offenses. For decades, nothing formally connected him to Moira. Then Gartshaw's own daughter, Sandra Brown, revealed that her father had confessed to her on his deathbed that he had murdered the child, that he was haunted by it, that he desperately wanted forgiveness before he died. That alone would have closed the case. But what makes this story genuinely extraordinary is what happened separately and entirely without connection. In 1999, an unrelated criminal named James Gallagly was dying in his own hospital bed. He had no contact with Gartshaw's daughter. He had no knowledge of her father's confession. And yet, on his own deathbed, Gallagly independently named Alexander Gartshaw as Moira Anderson's killer. 2 separate men, 2 separate deathbeds. No communication between them. The same name. Moira Anderson's body has never been found. Gartshaw was never formally charged. He died a free man. The case remains officially open 68 years later. Christopher Smith. For 30 years, the murder of Joan Harrison sat in the shadow of the wrong man. When the 26-year-old was killed in Preston in 1975, investigators initially attributed her death to Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, whose reign of terror across northern England had claimed 13 lives. When Sutcliffe was finally arrested in 1981, he was eliminated as a suspect in Harrison's case. The investigation went back to nothing. Then in 2008, a routine drunk driving arrest changed everything. A DNA swab taken from 60-year-old Christopher Smith during processing matched evidence recovered from Joan Harrison's crime scene 30 years earlier. Smith had terminal lung cancer. He knew exactly what the match meant. The day before he died, he sat down and wrote a letter. Rambling, fragmented, and unmistakably a confession. He admitted to Harrison's murder and pleaded for forgiveness. Officers confirmed the letter the following morning. Christopher Smith died hours later. Joan Harrison's family had waited 3 decades for a name, and it arrived the day before the man carrying it was gone. James Washington. In 2009, James Washington was already serving 15 years in a Tennessee prison for attempted murder when a severe seizure sent him to hospital. In that moment, genuinely convinced he was about to die, he asked a guard to call police. When officers arrived at his bedside, he confessed in full that in 1995 he had murdered Joyce Goodner and left her body in an abandoned house in Nashville. He provided details specific enough that only the killer or the original investigators could have known them. Then James Washington did not die. He recovered completely, and the moment he was well enough to speak clearly, he attempted to retract everything, claiming he had been hallucinating, that the confession meant nothing, that it should be ignored. Prosecutors did not agree. They used the confession alongside evidence placing Washington and Goodner in a prior relationship and brought him to trial. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They convicted him of Goodner's murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He confessed from what he genuinely believed was his deathbed. He survived. He tried to deny it. The words had already left his mouth, and no court was prepared to pretend otherwise. Neil Anderson. Stephen Lindsay was shot once in his van outside a motel in Copley, Ohio in April 2002. So no forensic evidence connecting anyone. The case went cold within a few years and stayed that way for over 2 decades. In March 2023, Neil Anderson, dying of a terminal illness, called his brother to his hospital bed and confessed that he had shot Lindsay over a debt that had never been repaid. Then he died. His brother sat with the confession for 18 months, paralyzed by what revealing it would mean for the family. He told nobody. Then in November 2024, a year and a half after being told, the brother finally walked into a police station and reported everything. Detective Mike Giovanno confirmed the details matched evidence from the scene that only the killer or investigators could have known. The case was officially closed. 1 month later, the brother who had carried that confession also died. If he had waited 4 more weeks, well, the truth would have died with him. The second time in 18 months, it had nearly vanished. It was solved with less than a month to spare. Lieutenant Walter Haut. Lieutenant Walter Haut was the public affairs officer at Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947, the man whose name and signature appeared on the original press release announcing that the United States military had recovered a flying disc from a nearby ranch. Within hours, that press release was retracted and replaced with an explanation involving a weather balloon. For the next 58 years, Haut publicly supported the official version of events. He gave interviews. He deflected questions. He performed his role perfectly. What nobody knew was that he had prepared a sealed affidavit with instructions that it was not to be opened until after his death. When Haut died in December 2005, the document was finally read. In it, he stated unequivocally that the weather balloon story had been a deliberate cover-up, constructed and maintained by direct order. He described personally handling crash debris that felt unlike any material he had ever encountered. He described being taken to a secured hangar where he observed the actual wreckage and the remains of 2 non-human bodies recovered from the site. He signed the affidavit. He died standing by what was in it. Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa walked into the parking lot of a Detroit restaurant on July 30th, 1975, and was never seen again. The most powerful labor union leader in America simply vanished without a trace, and for decades the theories multiplied while the answers stayed buried. It was Frank Sheeran, one of Hoffa's most trusted men, a hitman who claimed to have carried out at least 25 killings at Hoffa's personal direction, who finally broke the silence on his deathbed. According to Sheeran's confession, he was the one who ended Hoffa's life, acting on the direct orders of organized crime boss Russell Bufalino. The man Hoffa had trusted completely with his most violent work was the same man who walked him to his death. Sheeran's account became the foundation of Charles Brandt's book, and later Martin Scorsese's film The Irishman. Whether every detail is accurate continues to be debated by investigators and historians, but Sheeran died in 2003 insisting it was true. Hoffa was officially declared dead in 1982. His remains have never been found. The parking lot he walked into that afternoon has never given anything back. Sam Little. For 30 years, Samuel Little moved between Miami, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Louisville, and left bodies behind him each time. He was finally arrested in 2012 at a homeless shelter in Kentucky on a narcotics charge. Routine DNA testing connected him to 3 unsolved murders in Los Angeles. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms, but Texas Ranger James Holland suspected the number was far higher. Over the course of 700 hours of recorded interviews conducted across several years, Holland, deliberately avoiding the usual interrogation tactics, coaxed confession after confession from Little, who described his victims with photographic precision, eye color, clothing, the specific details of their deaths. By the time Little died in 2020 at the age of 80, he had confessed to 93 murders. The FBI verified and confirmed 61 cases. He is the most prolific serial killer in American history. For decades, he had moved through America completely undetected and appeared to have been waiting patiently for someone to finally sit down and ask. Joseph Sutherland. For almost 50 years, the murders of Jocelyn Tice and Donna Gilmore in Ontario, Canada remained completely cold. 2 women, 2 separate cases with no suspects. In 2021, advances in genetic genealogy finally narrowed the investigation to one man. 61-year-old Joseph George Sutherland of Moosonee, Ontario. Police obtained a warrant for his DNA and traveled to his home to collect it. The sample was submitted to the lab. The results had not yet returned. Sutherland did not yet know whether the science would confirm anything at all. And yet, before those results came back, before he had any reason to believe he was definitively caught, he reached out to a close personal friend and confessed to both murders in full detail. That friend was a retired Ontario provincial police officer. He reported the confession immediately. When the DNA results arrived, they confirmed exactly what Sutherland had already admitted. He died before he could stand trial, meaning no formal conviction was ever recorded. But both cases were publicly closed. He had confessed before the evidence was even in, as though after 50 years, the weight of it had simply become more than he could carry. Mark Chopper Reed. Mark Brandon Reed spent most of his adult life in prison and made no apologies for it. Australia's most infamous career criminal, known to the entire country as Chopper, had been convicted of kidnapping, armed robbery, and arson, among other crimes. Through books, stage shows, and a successful film, he had turned notoriety into a kind of celebrity. But one charge had always eluded him: murder. That changed in October 2013 when Reed, diagnosed with liver cancer and with weeks remaining, sat down for a final televised interview with Australia's 60 Minutes, 16 days before he died. Sitting calmly opposite the camera, he acknowledged his involvement in the deaths of 19 people. When the interviewer pressed him on why he had done what he had done, Reed answered that why had never been part of his thinking. He passed away on October 9, 2013 at the age of 58. His final interview was not a confession in a hospital room or a hospice bed. It was delivered on national television to an audience of millions, with the cameras still rolling. Henry Alexander. Willie Edwards Jr. was 25 years old when he disappeared from Montgomery, Alabama in January 1957. Months later, his body was pulled from the Alabama River. Decomposition had made cause of death impossible to determine, and the case went cold for nearly 2 decades before being reopened in 1976 when members of a local Ku Klux Klan chapter came under suspicion. Without a confirmed cause of death or sufficient evidence, no charges were ever filed. Then, in 1992, one of the accused was dying of lung cancer. Henry Alexander called his wife to his bedside and told her what had actually happened. He had lied to his fellow Klansmen, fabricated an accusation that Willie Edwards had made a pass at a white woman, a deliberately false claim designed to provoke a violent response. It worked precisely as he intended. The group forced Edwards at gunpoint to jump from a bridge into the river below. Alexander had invented the justification himself from nothing. He confessed to his wife from his deathbed. He was never arrested. He died 2 years after the confession, having faced no consequences whatsoever for manufacturing a man's death. Margaret Gibson. She was alone when it happened, a heart attack at 70, collapsing on the kitchen floor of her home with no warning and no time to prepare. In those final minutes, Margaret Gibson, a largely forgotten actress from Hollywood's silent era, called out to a neighbor and spoke words that reignited one of the most enduring unsolved murders in American history. She admitted to shooting and killing film director William Desmond Taylor on February 1st, 1922. Taylor's murder had paralyzed Hollywood. The investigation had been catastrophically mishandled from the first hour. Studio executives swept through the crime scene before police arrived, removing evidence and correspondence nobody ever recovered. Multiple suspects had been named and cleared across the following decades. The case had never been officially solved. Gibson offered no motive in those final moments. She left no physical evidence behind. She died before any formal investigation could begin. Whether what she confessed was truth, guilt, or a dying woman's final unburdening, only she ever knew. The case remains officially unsolved. Her words remain the closest thing to an answer that exists. Marie Antoinette watch stolen. One night in April 1983, someone broke into the Los Angeles Mayer Museum for Islamic Art in Jerusalem and stole items worth tens of millions of dollars, including a custom-made pocket watch crafted for Marie Antoinette herself, valued at approximately $30 million. The thief vanished completely. For 20 years, investigators had nothing. The man responsible was Naaman Diller, an Israeli criminal who had fled the country after the heist and settled quietly in Los Angeles, where he lived out the remainder of his life surrounded by the very items he had stolen. The Marie Antoinette watch sat undiscovered in his California home for 2 decades. Before he died in 2004, Diller confided everything to his wife: the confession, the full extent of what he had taken, and where it all was. The case only broke open when his widow, apparently misjudging the consequences, attempted to sell some of the stolen pieces back to the museum itself. Authorities were alerted. The entire collection was recovered. The 21-year mystery solved itself the moment a grieving wife tried to cash in on her husband's final secret. Husband in the freezer. The story Jerry Kelly told was clean and simple. Her husband John had been struck by a car while crossing the street in Massachusetts. A tragic accident. Nothing suspicious. Nobody questioned it. And for over a decade, nobody looked any further. Jerry continued managing the Victoria Motel in Ventura, California, known to the owners as a strong, dependable woman with a boa constrictor around her shoulders. What nobody knew was that she also had a storage locker, and inside that locker, packed tightly and sealed shut, were John Kelly's remains. She had shot him after years of violent abuse, wrapped his body, and placed it in a freezer. When she moved from California back to Massachusetts years later, she transported the locker with her. It wasn't until 2004, dying of cancer, that Jerry finally told her daughter the truth. Her daughter called police immediately. Investigators opened the locker. It was exactly as she had described. John Kelly had been in that freezer the entire time. Geraldine Kelly died before she could be charged. E. Howard Hunt. For decades, the name E. Howard Hunt circulated at the edges of Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories. Never confirmed, never taken seriously enough to pursue. Hunt was a CIA operative, a Watergate conspirator, and a man who had been publicly named in connection with the events of November 22, 1963 more times than he could count. He denied everything, always. Then he died of pneumonia in January 2007 at the age of 88. And his sons revealed that he had prepared audio recordings to be played only after his death. In those recordings, Hunt named Lyndon B. Johnson as the architect of the assassination, described a network of CIA operatives involved in its execution, mentioned individuals positioned at the grassy knoll, and assigned himself a minor peripheral role, present but not central. That Taney offered no documentary evidence. Critics dismissed the recordings as the bitter final words of a man who had despised Kennedy personally. His sons believed every syllable. The Warren Commission's keynote that Oswald acted alone remains the official position. Hunt's recordings remain the most senior-level claim ever made against that conclusion. Michael Lee Wilson. Michael Lee Wilson had already been convicted of beating a convenience store clerk to death with a baseball bat during a 1995 Tulsa robbery. His execution was scheduled, the needle was coming. And so, just before it was administered in 2014, he told officials something that had waited 20 years to be said. He confessed that it was he, not teenagers DeMarco Carpenter and Malcolm Scott, who had fatally shot Karen Summers at a Tulsa house party in 1994. Both young men had been convicted of that murder. Both had been sentenced to life. Wilson had watched them go to prison for something he did and said nothing for 2 decades while they sat in cells for a crime they never committed. In 2016, Carpenter and Scott were finally released, and their convictions were overturned. Wilson died strapped to the execution table with the truth finally out, but only after 2 men lost 20 years of their lives for it. If these confessions kept you hooked, hit like and subscribe for more untold true crime stories. Which case shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments below.